right, we're going to talk about this thing today. This is the Mini 3 Pro, fresh off the press from DJI. This is the direct competitor to the Hotel Nano and the Nano Plus series. We're going to have a lot more videos on this in the future. Today, I just want to focus on this specific drone and give you all the features, tell you all the cool new things that come with it. And if you check this out, we have a lot of new things in here. We have a new gimbal right here, which will allow us to put the camera in a vertical mode. This is brand new. We'll talk about it. We also have a camera that can go much further up than we did in the past. We also have a redesigned folding. We can now fold these propellers in any direction, these arms right here in any direction. So that's kind of a new thing. And also we have a redesigned battery. And you notice that in here we have this little box, and actually inside we have two different types of batteries. They look exactly the same, but the weight is different. We have one that's going to be designed to keep this drone under 249 grams, and we're going to have one that's going to make it slightly bigger than 249 grams, but you're going to get a ton more flying. Also on this drone, we have new obstacle avoidance. This is not something that we've seen on the Mini series from DJI until now. There's actually sensors in the front and sensors in the back. This thing comes in a lot of different kits and it can get pretty confusing. So I want you to follow up here, and I'm going to give you the pricing as it's coming out and hitting the stores. You can actually buy this drone all by itself with the little gimbal cover here and a couple cables and couple propellers, and no controller. And this is pretty cool. This is going to be $669. Now, if you ask me, that's a pretty good deal. We've been flying this thing for a while now, and I'm really impressed. So we're going to tell you more about why we're impressed. You can also buy this drone with this controller right here, which is the traditional RC N1 controller that we've seen in a ton of other drones. This is going to cost you $759. And brand new is this thing right here, which is the new RC, the DJI RC, not the RC Pro, just the RC. It's a lighter version of the RC Pro or the old smart controller, and it's really cool. And this will cost you $909 if you want to get the drone and the controller in itself. On top of all this, you can also get an additional kit, the Flight More Combo. You may be familiar with the Flight More Combo from DJI. They have two versions now because they have two different sets of batteries. If you want the DJI Flight More Combo with two more batteries, the smaller version, that's an extra $189. And if you want to get two larger batteries, which is actually what we have on the table here, it's going to cost you $249. So we have one small battery, two big batteries in this combo right here. We have this thing right here, all of that for a little bit less than $1,200. Now, we want to compare this to some popular packages that we have out there. Obviously, you can buy the Mini SE, which is the very low entry level for DJI. That's going to cost you $299. You can also buy the Mini 2 right now as a standalone package for $449, and you can also buy that as a Fly More combo for $599. So think about the difference here. A brand new drone with more features obviously is going to be more expensive, but the Fly More combo will cost you roughly the same as just this drone right here alone. If you buy the Mavic Air 2, which is getting a bit older, the Fly More combo is the only thing that's available at the moment. That's going to be $789. And then if you want to buy the Hotel Nano Plus, it's going to cost you $899, which is actually more expensive than this drone right here alone. It's about the same price as this, plus the RC controller. So they priced it to be exactly at the same price point. The main difference is that, well, I think this offers a lot more. We have a video comparing this to the Nano Plus, so make sure you head to our channel and take a look at it. There's a lot to unpack with this and comparing it to other drones. So we wanted to do separate videos and keep this video to just talk specifically about this drone. And of course, you can compare this to the Air 2S, which comes at $999 with just the drone and just the controller, the basic controller. And if you wanted to add a smart controller on top of it, it's going to cost you $1749. So a lot more expensive than what you'll find here for less than $1,200 with this whole package. The most expensive you'll get with this is $1,158, which, well, I know it's a lot of money, but for what you get, it's actually a pretty darn good deal. Let's go ahead and talk about the design because you want to see what this thing looks like. Like I said, we have two different weights. We can do a 249 gram drone by adding the lighter battery, or you can make it all the way to 279 grams by adding the new battery. This does not qualify as a Category 1. I know you're asking. It doesn't qualify as a Category 2 either as we're recording this because, well, there's still no drones categorized as Category 2 or Category 3, which means that no, you cannot fly this thing over people. It also means that if you decide to go with the bigger batteries, you are going to have to register this drone regardless of how you fly. If you're in the US flying under recreational purposes, if you have the bigger batteries, you will need to register. Quite frankly, even if you have the smaller batteries, it puts it at $249. Whatever you add on top of this is going to make it over $249. Just make sure you register the drone. It doesn't cost. It's $5 on the FAA website. Just check out the link in the description to make sure you register from the right place. But this is cool because it looks different. It looks like a leaping frog. The back legs are very high up like this, and there's a reason for it, because as it starts to move forward, the airflow from these motors here is not going to get in the way of the airflow from these motors, which is really, really smart. The camera also goes all the way up. We mentioned that already. It will go up 60 degrees and go down 90 degrees. So the 60 degrees up, typically DJI drones have been going 20 degrees up. So that's a big difference. Another massive design difference here is the fact that we don't have legs that are hanging. In the past, in the other DJI drones, quite a few of them that fold like this, we have antennas that come down right here. And what it does is it makes it sit on the ground and sit on these antennas. Well, here you can see a difference. It's not sitting on this. And quite frankly, this is something that I don't like. This is one of the things that I don't like about this drone, is that it's pretty unstable when it sits right here. And if you were to land on something that's uneven, then the camera and the drone is going to have a tendency to tilt, and you may actually hit the propellers on the ground. We came really close when we first started flying with this, and then we realized that it's because the points of contact are right here at the base instead of being right here on the tips. So what we did is we took our 3D printer and we made little peg legs. We kind of broke them in the meantime, but this was kind of an initial design. And what you see here is now the drone is actually sitting on these peg legs. These are so light that they don't take the drone over 250 actually, or 249. So it's really cool to keep it right here, and it keeps the drone from moving. I'm sure people will make this available. We probably will make these available as STL, so you can download them and print them if you have it. But yeah, just something to keep in mind, because the drone just sits like this and might fall. We put this thing to the test. This is one of our first reviews. Actually, if you've been following us for a while, you know that we don't do drone reviews. We do drone deep dives, and we have a deep dive for this that's going on our website where we talk about all the features, but typically we don't give you our opinion on drones. Well, this is different. This is where we give you our opinion. And not only that, but we did more scientific testing. We put this through the test. We did flight time testing. We did thrust testing. We did camera testing on a chart. We have a beautiful chart in the studio that we can put this in front of the drone and then basically just record the quality. So we'll give you these results in a minute here. But this thing has bigger propellers than what we've seen before. As a result, what we see is a much bigger thrust. We were able to pull 420 grams of thrust with this drone, which in comparison to the Mini 2, for example, we only had 260 grams. This is pulling the equivalent of the weight of an 8-ball, more than what the Mini 2 does. This is actually one of the best thrust ratios that we've tested. We've tested 10 drones so far. Only the Lite Plus from Hotel was a little bit better, and the Matrice 300, obviously much bigger drone. But this had a pull ratio of 2.7, which means that, well, when you compare the thrust to the weight, it was 2.7 as opposed to 2.07 for the Mini 2. The battery also, we put a flight time in here. We put this in our cage here in a controlled environment in hover. We test our batteries at 7,700 feet density altitude. 7,700 feet density altitude. The small battery, we were able to get 87% of the advertised battery. That's 26 minutes and 50 seconds as opposed to the 31 minutes that it was advertised. Now you're going to say 87% might not be that great. Remember, we are at high elevation, 7,700 feet here, elevation, equivalent elevation because of density altitude. The larger battery, we were able to get 78%. We got 38 minutes and 48 seconds of actual flight time. They advertised 47. Again, it's less. We went all the way until the battery was depleted and the drone just could not stay up in the air. That was 78%. That 87% that we get was the best of all the drones we've ever tested. Now, as far as noise, we also tested that. We have a dB meter in the office that we've been using, and this At first, when I took this out the first time and I took off, I was like, holy smokes, this is very quiet. I have to say we've been flying a lot of big drones. We've been flying the Matrice 30 and the Matrice 300 and our own Octozilla, and these drones are pretty loud. So we tested this. It came out to be around 70 decibel when the drone was about 6 feet off the ground and the sensor was underneath it. Surprisingly, it's exactly the same as the Mini 2 and the Nano Plus. So if you have another mini drone, it's not going to be any quieter. Now, we wondered in the office why we thought it was so much quieter, and I think it's because of the pitch. Those propellers are bigger, which means I think they rotate at a slower RPM, which means that the noise is not as like a beehive. Okay, I think it's a little bit deeper in terms of frequency, and so I think it makes it sound a little bit less noisy than all the other drones we've tested. I do want to talk about some pros and cons of this design. We noticed that this has a much better stability and maneuverability. This thing is zippy. You put it in sports mode and it feels like a fat FPV aircraft. It flies, it just climbs and it descends and it's super responsive. It's actually a ton of fun. We were giggling like little schoolgirls as we were flying this thing in the back, just because it's fun. It's a ton of fun to fly. So it also has really good wind resistance. We haven't tested it, but the website says level 5 for the wind, so we're going to trust them. We'll probably do some testing in the future on that, but at the moment we don't have a way to test that. I do have to mention there's no fan in here. When you turn this on, it's completely silent. If you have a Nano Plus, for example, or even a Mini 2, you'll hear a little bit of a fan going on in the background. The plus side is that it's quiet. The downside is that if it's not moving, it's gonna get hot. We've tested it on the bench, doing pictures, doing a whole lot of different things, and it overheated. This is the first drone that I've tested that overheats. Now you're gonna say, well, that's not fair. Drones usually fly, they have movement, and I agree with that. It's just something that I need to mention. If you have this thing turned on your desk and you're downloading footage from it, then maybe at one point it's gonna overheat just because, well, it doesn't have a fan. Also, I do need to mention the battery charger is pretty slow. If you use the regular USB to plug it in right here. This comes with a Fly More combo. If you don't have the Fly More combo, you're going to charge the battery using the USB-C in the back right here, and it's pretty slow. Now, what we found out is that we have a Mavic 3 in the office, and we use the Mavic 3 charger to charge it, and it's fast, okay? We plug it in here. These little lights right here, they'll light up as you charge the drone, and if you charge it on a slow charger, it goes very slow, ting, 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 and then when you put it on a fast charger, it's like ting, 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 ting. You can see it really going extremely fast. Okay. Let's talk about the controller. This new thing right here. This is a beauty. I love smart controllers. I'm not gonna lie. So if you don't like smart controllers, you're probably not gonna like this because, well, it's the same principle. It's much lighter than the other controllers that we've seen before. This comes in at 386 grams for this RC controller right here. This RC1N1 with an iPhone on it, this is my iPhone 13 Plus, it comes out at about 675 grams. So not twice as much, but pretty close to it. You can feel right here, well, you can't, I can. You can feel a much bigger difference. And not only that, obviously, you would have to plug in your phone, you would have to make sure your phone is charged, and then make sure it doesn't overheat and all these things. This is all in one. You turn it on, it's connected to the drone, and you take off, all right? There are no antennas in here, so if you're used to seeing the antennas from the other controllers, it's going to be a little bit of a difference. And then there's no ability to install third-party apps. So if you want to do something like mapping, not that this is a mapping drone really, but if you wanted to install Litchi, for example, you won't be able to do that because this is fully enclosed. It only has DJI Fly app in here. And also there's different sticks up here. I know this is picky, but these sticks, they're different than any of the other sticks that we've seen on any other controllers in the past. So it just means another type of sticks, which is a little bit annoying. So this new controller has OcuSync 3 or O3 as DJI calls it, 2.4, 5.8 gigahertz, 12 kilometer range, and then 1080 resolution at 30 frames per second. This is the same impressive resolution that we've seen with the Mavic 3, for example. I just love what DJI does with this. This is something that we have to give to DJI. They have the ability to get this signal to come in and hear so clearly inside the controller. If you use the RC1, RCN1, same thing, O3, 2.4, 5.8, 12 kilometer range, and also 1080 with the resolution at 30 frames per second. So you won't see much of a difference in terms of quality, but I think in terms of easiness of use, this is going to be a great option right here. Like I said, 386 grams. If you compare this to the RC Pro is almost 700 grams at 692, and then it's 714 grams for the original smart controller. So this sits about halfway through in terms of weight, very easy to transport when you're on the go. Now, when we compare this to the RC Pro, which is the new controller that came with the Mavic 3, there's a bit of a difference. We have to look at the buttons. There is no 5D button where you can select different things in here. Now, personally, I don't use this. I use the touchscreen, so that doesn't mean much for me. There's also no navigation button. On the edges here, you have a go back and an enter button. These don't exist on the new RC controller. It's also not as bright. Now, I have to say this is 1000 nit. I have no idea how much this is, but I know it's less. We've tested it. My guess, it's probably around 700 nits. So it's not going to be as good in a very, very bright environment, although I haven't really had much of a complaint when I used it outside, and it's pretty bright where we live. Another difference, this has an HDMI out. This does not have an HDMI out. So if you're doing a lot of videos like I do where you want to send that signal to something else, you can't do that. You can still record internally, which is cool, but you just can't have any HDMI coming out. You also can't install third-party apps. I mentioned that before. And then the sound, it's kind of weird. We were talking about this with Billy Kyle. The sound out of this thing is not great. Please go and check Billy's video. He has also great reviews of this device right here. Make sure you head to his channel. We'll put a link down in here and give him some love. All right, let's talk about the camera on this thing. The camera on this thing is, well, this is what you're buying this drone for. It's got an interesting sensor. It's a 1/1.3 inches CMOS sensor. If you do the math in your head, it's a 0.77 inch. It's 3/4 of an inch. So it's somewhere between a 1/2 inch sensor that you would find on a Mini 2, although it's not exactly a 1 inch sensor on the Mini 2. It's a bit smaller than that. And it's right between that and what you would find on a 1 inch sensor. This has an aperture of f1.7, so it's really, really bright. And the ISO range is 100 to 6400. We put all of that through the test, and I'm going to show you the results in a second here. This has an electronic shutter. You can do 2-second exposure all the way to 1 to 8 thousandths of a second. And like I said, the camera will go up 60 degrees and then down 90 degrees. And also we can do vertical photos, and I'm going to also show you some examples of that. In terms of the settings for the camera, the different modes for the camera, you can do auto exposure bracketing at 3, 5, and 7. You can also do panoramas, the sphere, the vertical, and the wide angle like you can on other cameras. You can also record all this in JPEG or JPEG plus RAW. Interestingly, there's no way to do just RAW. So if you don't like doing JPEG plus RAW, well, you're stuck. You have to do it if you want to capture RAW footage. And in terms of videos, this will allow you to do 4K up to 60 frames per second, starting at 24 frames per second. Same thing for 2.7K. And then in full HD, there is a slow motion mode that will go all the way to 120 frames per second. Now, I do have to say, DJI send this to us. We have a pre-production model. Some of these functionalities are not available on our drone, so we were not able to test the 120 frames per second, but I know it's going to be available in here. You can also record in MPEG-4 or MOV, and then choose between H.264 and HEVC, which is H.265 codec. We tested both of them. I'm going to give you some results as well in a minute. Now, this claims to have 150 megabit per second in terms of quality. We tested it, and out of this drone, again, this is a pre-production, so it might be different, but we were not able to get that high. We tested it in every possible mode, H.264, H.265, MOV or MPEG-4, and we get the same results every time for the different qualities. And we were able to record everything in 8-bit. There's no 10-bit, which is fine. This is a small drone, right? But the max that we got was 93 megabit per second at 4K. All the 4K modes were 93 megabit per second, and then at 2.7K 60. And then at 2.7K 24 and 30 frames per second, we could only get 52 megabit per second. And then at 1080 60 frames per second, we got 71 megabit per second. And then all the way down to 1080 24 and 30 frames per second, we only get 36 megabit per second. So again, this might change. Don't take my word for it. This is all the testing that we did, but at this stage, it doesn't meet the 150 advertised megabit per second. The interesting thing about this camera that I found, we spent a lot of time in front of our charts outside testing it, and it has a dual native ISO. And we weren't able to get the exact data at what point there's a dual native ISO. We know there's a dual native ISO, but it looks like from our testing that the ISO is ISO 100 and ISO 1600. And I want to show you some samples because this was really cool. What we notice is once we get to 1600, the colors change a tiny little bit. We had set the entire camera on manual mode at a specific white balance. And as soon as we hit 1600, something happens inside the camera that makes things change a little bit. So we're guessing that at that stage, 1600 is the dual native ISO for the higher level. It's really cool to have dual native ISO on such a small camera. We do have Panasonic cameras that we record on in the studio. They all have dual native ISO. Sony has dual native ISO. And if you don't know what that is, it basically means that the image quality gets progressively worse as you get to a higher ISO. And then all of a sudden you get to the dual native ISO and it gets better. And it's not super obvious. There's still it's still not perfect. At 1600, there's still some noise, but we were pretty impressed actually with the results. So here, let's take a look at ISO 100, and I'm gonna scroll through and keep increasing. This is a close-up of one of the shots that we took in our testing chart inside of the studio. You can see here the large version of that, and we're going to be zooming in on some of these different areas. We do this in a controlled environment with a ton of light, and we make sure that we keep all the settings the same for exposure, so you can see the difference in ISO and see all the noise as it starts to build up. And I have to say, we did this testing twice on this drone, and every single time I was like, this is not possible. How is it possible they were able to get this kind of quality with this small of a camera? We even put it against, well, other drones, including the Air 2S, and I'll show you the results of that in a second, and it is really impressive. So here at ISO 100, everything looks pretty good. ISO 200, you can start to see a bit more noise. 400, I would go even all the way to 800, where you start to see much more artifacts. And then here's 1600, things are starting to go downhill. And here's ISO 3200. And then here's ISO 6400. I don't recommend using that, but you probably know that already. It's too small of a sensor and it's too high of an ISO anyway, so I definitely wouldn't be trying this. Here's another part of the chart that we zoomed in. I call this the barcode section. And here this is at ISO 100. Now I do want to pinpoint all the way at the bottom, on that bottom row, right in the middle of the screen, there is we call it a torture test for sensors. And that shape right here at the bottom created a lot of artifacts. And this is the only thing that we've seen from that sensor that looks a little sketchy. But again, this is a torture test. That area is really, really small on our chart, but you can see it's going to get worse and worse and worse as we go. And we didn't see this in other charts, in other cameras that we tested. So this might be something with their sensors and the way that they calculate data. It just didn't look great. But again, this is a tiny little spot right here. So this is ISO 100, ISO 200, ISO 400, 800, 1600, and then 3200 right here. You can see it's purple in the middle of that little spot at the bottom, and obviously we have visible noise on the black bars. And here's ISO 6400. So obviously it gets worse as you get higher. This is expected, but I wanted to give you this information here so you can see exactly the details. We're going to put this information in our blog post where you'll have the ability to download all of these photos and compare them yourself. So make sure you head down to the Pilot Institute blog, and then here you'll see the review, and we'll put a link down in the description. Now here's another part. I call this the grass area, and we put a lot of different things in this section because we wanted to see texture and details, and especially on the grass, see how that grass was going to change at different ISO. And yes, you notice there is some shadows. It's because of the lighting, the way we have it in the studio. But as we increase the ISO, you notice that things are getting a bit more noisy. We start to lose details on that sandpaper piece at the bottom. That tiny little guitar is also starting to lose details, and the rocks are starting to get a bit more noisy. It's still fairly impressive. When you see the comparison of this with the Nano Plus, for example, or we're going to compare this to the Mini 2 as well and to the Air 2S, you'll be pretty impressed with what this little drone is capable of doing. The next area here is also a torture test. These lines are slightly at an angle on one side and flat on the other side. And they are very tiny, okay? They are very tiny. I need to mention that if you look at them up close with your eyes, you will see how tiny they are printed on this chart. But this is a great torture test because it allows us to see how much detail the sensor is able to get. And I have to say the Mini 3 has outperformed any of the other drones that we've tested to date, including some like the Mavic 3. I know, even the Mavic 3 was not able to get these little details right here because it's a torture test. And so as we go higher in the ISO, you notice that we start to see a bit more artifacts, but at least we have the ability to see these lines. In other drones we've tested, it's just a big blotch right here, especially on the top right side and on the middle column that we have. So at 1600, 3200, and 6400, you can really start to see artifacts. But again, very impressed with the quality of the data that we have here. As always, like I said, you can download that data and look at it yourself without the compression from YouTube and see exactly how we did it. Here's another one. This is the center of our chart. We put this information in the center to help us center the camera, and we have different shades of gray and light blue in here so that we can see how the noise changes. And again, I'm going to keep scrolling through all of these 1600 and 3200 and 6400, and you can see that the noise is starting to get more visible in those areas. And one more, this is the last one I want to test right here. We have text with colors, and this is also kind of a torture test. We have a small font at 12 point, and in most drones, this disappears completely very early, even at ISO 100. But here, you can actually read the 12-point font, but as we start to get into the higher ISO, you notice that the black text on the purple, for example, start to disappear, and then the sharpness of the letters is not nearly as good. Again, torture test, this is exactly why we created that chart, but I think the results are pretty cool. In the documentation from DJI, they claim that this little drone right here, the sensor here, is as good as a 20 megapixel 1-inch sensor equivalent. And guess what has a 20 megapixel 1-inch sensor? The Air 2S. So what we did is we, put them to the test and we compare them. And here's the result. I'm only going to show you two ISO 200 and ISO 1600, and then you'll have the ability to compare the two. Here's the Mini 3 on the left side and the Air 2S on the right side. Well, here at that level, if you look closely, it's kind of a match. I would say that the Mini 3 Pro is a tad bit sharper than the Air 2S, but in terms of the colors, they match pretty well. But when we get to the barcode section, the Mini 3 is clearly crispier and more detailed than the Air 2S at the same ISO and with the same amount of light hitting it. And this was very surprising to me. So their claim so far has been correct. The only thing is that torture test little circle in the middle that I showed you before that get purple. The Air 2S did not suffer from that. And then here as well, we see that the Mini 3 Pro is actually crispier on the grass area than the Air 2S. And I have to say, the Air 2S camera in the middle is very crisp, but as you start to go on the edges, it is not nearly as crisp. The Mini 3 Pro, they had the ability to get the camera pretty crisp all the way around. So in all the testing that you'll see when we get around the edges of the chart, the Air 2S doesn't do all that great. Even though it is a great drone, it's one of our favorites, but here you can also see the difference. You can see how it almost looks out of focus on the Air 2S, but it's not. It is really the way that this came out of the sensor. We tested the focus several times and everything else was in focus, but that area is just a torture, and you can see the difference between the two. And same here, top and bottom. At the top, we have the Mini 3 Pro, and at the bottom we have the Air 2S. The Mini 3 Pro was just darker on the blacks and just had, I would say, more dynamic range, I have to admit, at that level. And then finally, you see two sides here. We have the 200 point on the left, and then we have the color chart on the right. On the right side, the letters were not nearly as crisp on the Air 2S as they were on the Mini 3, and then same thing on the left side. And these two areas are co-located on our chart, but it was pretty obvious to us that the Mini 3 was just crispier, just better overall at 200 ISO. So I decided, I said, well, what about 1600 ISO? Let's see what that looks like at 1600 ISO because, well, the Air 2S has a much bigger sensor, 1 inch, which means that the pixel density is a lot less. And well, and I hate to say, but I was wrong. Other than this right here, where I think the Air 2S on this section was a tad bit better at 1600 ISO, I think everything else, the Mini 3 still won. And that was really surprising. Here, if you look on the top row, the Air 2S is significantly less crisp. Again, the only thing is that tiny little spot in the middle of the bottom row. The 3 Pro doesn't do a great job, but that's just that one portion. And then here again on the grass, that grass is just not crisp on the Air 2S, and it's fairly good on the Mini 3 Pro. Again, we'll put the full-size sample on the blog so you can see that. And then here, the Mini 3 Pro again, taking over the Air 2S, so that's another win. And then lastly, on this one, I think the colors were a lot deeper on the 3 Pro, and then the blacks were a little bit better as well with less noise on the 3 Pro. So all in all, this was a great comparison. You can see the last one here with the colors. Again, on the right side, the letters were not as crisp on the Air 2S, and same thing on the left side. This was surprising. I kept looking at this and telling the team to come and look at the results because I was really surprised. So they've done it. I think they've made something that's better, at least on paper from our testing, than the Air 2S. Now, I want you to remember also, this is only for photos. These are only photo testing that we did because it was easy to control the environment. The Air 2S still has the ability to do 5.2K. And I'm not saying the Air 2S is not a bad drone because we love that drone, but I think in terms of backup drone, this might become one of our favorite backup drone when we go out and need to do B-roll. Also on the camera, we have D-Cine-like colors that are going to be available. Was not available for me in the pre-release version, but I'm sure it's coming around the corner. Most mini drones have only the regular colors, the normal colors. Here you'll be able to do something closer to log, even though it's not log, it's D-Cine-like. But that's a lot of people like that type of footage. And then the digital zoom, we have 1080, we can do 4x. At 2.7K, we can do 3x, and then at 4K, you can do 2x. The quality was okay. You can definitely tell it's a digital zoom, especially when you get to 4x. I wasn't super impressed, but it's handy if you need to use it. I might want to use 4K at 2x because it looked okay. It wasn't too obvious. So we'll let you decide when you look at the footage that's playing here in the background. And then I also like the fact that here we can clip a filter on as opposed to having to just have it hang on top of the camera, if that makes any sense. This is very reminiscent of the larger drones from DJI, where you can take this piece off, replace it with a filter. This is not a filter, by the way. You can put your finger through it, but it at least protects the lens a little bit in case you crash. And like I said, there's no ability to do RAW only. So I'm picky, but that's, I need to mention it. And then we have the vertical shots. The vertical shots are pretty cool. If you're a content creator that does something for social media, I'm not gonna lie, I hate having to record in 9:16 format. I think it's, well, I don't like portrait mode. I like having traditional landscape videos. But if this is what you do on social media and it's required by the social media that you use, well, now you can have this in your pocket and you don't have to do editing. The cool thing about it is that you can go pretty far up because now you have a pretty wide angle on the vertical format, on portrait format, which means you can fit more in. If you do pictures of buildings, for example, or tall mountains, like I did right here, then you'll have the ability from the same distance to get a lot more on a vertical shot. This is Thumb Butte right behind my house, and you can see the entire trail going up. With the horizontal format, I wasn't able to get nearly as much of the trail in there. So I think it has a purpose if this is what you want to do. You can do photos and videos in that mode, and I'm sure some of you will like it. All right, we're getting towards the end of it, but I wanted to talk about these intelligent flight modes that DJI added, and that starts with panorama. You have the ability to do panorama in a lot of different ways. You can also do quick shots. Now, In the past, you could not do asteroids. That was the only one that was missing from the Mini. Now you can do that, so they've added asteroid, but more importantly, they've added a lot of different intelligent flight modes, such as the Master Shot, the Spotlight 2.0, Active Track 4.0, and the Point of Interest 3.0, and even hyperlapse. These were things that were reserved for more expensive drones in the past. DJI listened. A lot of people wanted to see these flight modes added, especially the Spotlight and the ability to do active track and follow someone. We'll have a full video on how these work. At the moment, hyperlapse is not available on this testing drone, so we'll be waiting until that comes out and we'll be giving you the full gamut. We've tested it in the deep dive, so if you want to go into the deep dive course, it's a free course. It's about 2 hours long. It gives you a lot more details about this than I'm going to do in this video, and it goes into all the different settings. So we'll put a link down in the description. Make sure that you enroll in that. And then lastly, I want to talk about safety features because this is also something new. Obviously, these obstacle avoidance sensors right here, new to the Mini series, at least for DJI. Hotel had that on the Nano Plus series, but this has APAS, which is the obstacle avoidance system that allows you to also avoid obstacles by having the drone automatically climb or go sideways. You can turn it off if you don't like it, or you can turn it on to stop. So if the drone senses a wall, then it's going to stop and then let you do the next thing, or it can actually bypass. So that's what the APAS system is for, and go either on top or to the side. You can actually disable going to the side, so the drone will only go on top or underneath an object. And we've tested it quite a bit, and it's fun. It works. It's nerve-wracking because we didn't want to break this on day one, but we tested it, and it's pretty impressive. Be careful with small branches. I'm sure it's not going to pick small branches, but we did it with pretty big obstacles, and I was able to pick it up. Now, as far as APAS, I need to mention something that's really important because I've seen this on other DJI drones in the past, and that's a limitation a lot of people don't know about. You cannot use APAS as you are recording if you record at 4K at any frame rate, or if you record at 2.7K or 1080 at 48 frames per second or higher. If you like recording at 4K 30 or 4K 24, APAS will not be available as you record. Be aware of that because you're going to be saying, hey, let's test APAS and see how it works. You start recording, you get to your object, you think the aircraft is going to go around, and boom, it crashes because APAS is not available. They might change that in the future. They have in the past with other drones, but at the moment, it is not available, so be aware of that. We noticed that there is no AirSense data in here. AirSense is the technology that captures ADSB data from aircraft. We knew that this wasn't going to be in here because DJI doesn't put that in their 250-gram drones, but it's something that you need to know. There's no ADSB in. So if you're relying on this for making sure you know where helicopters are or other aircraft, it's not going to be available. This also does not have Aeroscope, which is the equivalent of Remote ID for DJI. Does that mean that this drone won't be retrofitted to Remote ID? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. At the moment, this does not need Remote ID if it's not used for commercial purposes or for Part 107 purposes. So if you fly for recreational purposes, you will not need Remote ID when the time comes. But if you fly for non-recreational purposes, you will need it, and I don't know if it will have the ability to do it. Also, something in here, I do need to mention that it has geofencing just like every other DJI drone. So if you hate geofencing, well, this is going to be no different. We had a couple issues with it. Make sure that you logged into your account when you have this warning that pops up if you want to get approval, but we were able to get around it and fly in geofenced area. So that's it. That's kind of a wrap up for this drone. My opinion, you probably heard it by now, but there's a couple things that I really like about it. I like the new flight modes in here. For Mini, having APAS, having the ability to do active track, I think is really cool for beginners that are gonna buy this drone. Vertical shooting, really cool if you're a social media person and post a lot of that format. The new controller is really cool. We've been using it quite a bit, and I look forward to using it some more. And And then the larger battery size, I think, is a genius move. You can keep the drone under 250 if you want to, but if you want more flight time, go for it, get the bigger batteries, and then that's out of the picture. And then the 48 megapixel CMOS sensor, quad buyer. I've never been a fan of quad buyer, but I have to say the results from this thing are really, really impressive. Better than the Air 2S based on our testing. So that's impressive. And then it's super responsive. It's fun to fly. I bet you're gonna put this in sports mode and start climbing and descending, and you're gonna giggle because it's so much fun. As far as what I don't care about, the slow charging was definitely a pain at first until we figured it out. The weird position on the ground, it tends to rock. So be careful when you land on uneven surfaces so you don't ding the props. And then no fan. If you're going to be downloading photos or whatever it is on your desk and the thing is not moving, it's going to overheat eventually. And then the fact that you can't install any new apps on the smart controller, I think is going to be a limitation for some. I've never really installed any on my smart controllers, so not a limitation for me, but it's something you need to be aware of. And the HDMI out. I'm kind of bummed about that, and I'm not gonna lie, not having the ability to send this to a Ninja or something else to show the footage. And the fact that you don't have APAS in high resolution modes is also a bit of a bummer, but something that you need to be aware of. So I think, final thoughts, overall, this is great if you're gonna be a beginner and you wanna spend maybe a little bit more money than a Mini SE or even the Mini 2, the predecessor, and your first drone, hard to crash into things because it has sensors. It has plenty of space in terms of the image quality for you to grow into it. Is it perfect for commercial purposes? I don't know. I haven't tested that enough to give you an answer at the moment, but I'm sure this will be a competitor to the Air 2S. I think it's positioning itself right between the Mavic Mini 2 and the Air 2S, and the price point seems to go into that direction. So go out, get one, test it, tell me what you think. Leave your questions down in here. We'll be able to answer them. We've flown this thing for a while, and I think we've got a pretty good idea of exactly what it does. So that's it. Like, subscribe. Be sure to check out the other videos we have on this drone and other drones. We provide a lot of services and a lot of information, and I'll see you on the next video.